mindlessly following the commands of your village leader. But when you're betrayed by the very people you grew up with, you agree to retrieve the elixir of life in a mysterious paradise in exchange for a free and fulfilling life. The anime opens with a beheading, an execution that requires a high degree of skill, but strangely, something goes wrong. As the executioner swings his blade, he's horrified to see his blade snap upon clashing with our MC's neck, Gabimaru. Gabimaru is clearly depressed, wondering why he still has to suffer, especially living a life filled with bloodshed. Taken back to his cell, we see Sajiri Yamada as Seaman profiling Gabimaru, uttering that Gabimaru was born a shinobi in the village of Awagakure, and breaking a blade with his flesh isn't too uncommon for someone from Awagakure. Sajiri asks if Gabimaru can show off some of his ninjutsu, but Gabimaru refuses, eventually taken out to be executed by burning. Gabimaru acknowledges that death by burning is quite tortuous, as the victim is forced to endure pain until the toxic fumes take them out. But in the present, the men seem to be having trouble with burning Gabimaru, as it seems only his clothes are affected. In his cell, Sajiri is forced to avert her eyes whilst recording the events that happened today, asking Gabimaru about his past. Gabimaru says his parents were slain when he was a child by his village chief, a mystery he has yet to solve. Plus, as a shinobi, Gabimaru had no emotions and hunted as he was told to. Sajiri asks how Gabimaru was captured, hearing that Gabimaru wanted to leave his village, but his fellow shinobi ended up betraying him, something Gabimaru believes the village chief had orchestrated. Up next, Gabimaru is to be executed by bulls, a method where the victim is ripped apart by two mighty bulls. When Gabimaru's execution starts, he subtly pulls back against the bulls, completely ruining his execution, but this makes Sajiri call out Gabimaru for lying, seeing as he clearly has the will to live. Sajiri asks for more information on the reason why Gabimaru wanted to leave his village, and seeing as there is no point in hiding it, Gabimaru reveals that since he was the strongest in his village, the village chief had asked for his daughter, Yui, to marry Gabimaru. Gabimaru was disgusted at how naive Yui was, annoyed that Yui had tried teaching him proper etiquette and manners, and so Gabimaru left the village to get away from her. When Gabimaru had told the village chief of his departure, the village chief had requested Gabimaru take on one final task, but that was when his fellow shinobis had cornered and captured him. Gabimaru says his life isn't as interesting as others had hoped, but as Sajiri heads through town later that night, she is warned by her fellow executioner to be wary of Gabimaru, especially since his alias is Gabimaru the Hollow, a man with no emotions. Apparently, there are rumors of an elixir of life from Shinsenkyo that can grant anyone immortality. And with Sajiri hearing that even 20 men could barely capture Gabimaru, she deduces that Gabimaru is still hiding something. The next day, the executioners attempt to boil Gabimaru alive with some searing oil, but even such a horrific method doesn't faze Gabimaru. Seeing as it's finally her time to shine, Sajiri asks for Gabimaru to be escorted underground, and upon entering into a creepy-looking room, Sajiri reveals herself to be a sword tester from Edo. Sajiri dawns from the Yamada clan, a group of people that test out swords and act as executioners, and seeing as Sajiri is a woman capable of being bestowed the Seaman role, Gabimaru suddenly flinches as he can detect killing intent from Sajiri. Feeling fear, Gabimaru suddenly breaks free from his cuffs, and as Sajiri appears behind him with a slash, Gabimaru instinctively leaps back to evade. Finally shedding blood, Gabimaru continues to evade Sajiri's advances, listening in as Sajiri declares that a person's true nature is revealed right before their death. Having pulled together Gabimaru's history, Sajiri declares that Gabimaru still wants to live, especially since he loves his wife. Suddenly hit with a wave of emotions, Gabimaru remembers the fond memories he had with Yui, becoming enraged as he steals a sword only to begin clashing blades with Sajiri. Sajiri presses further by asking why Gabimaru continues to lie to himself. But Gabimaru refuses to listen, flashing back to a time when Yui had pointed out how kind Gabimaru was to her. When Gabimaru had reminded Yui that he had been hollow his entire life, Yui says a hollow man would have never accepted her, especially with such a horrific scar on her face. Yui knew that men in her village are sent off to hunt and gather, whilst women are to stay at home and bear children. Something her father recognized, hence, he was the reason why Yui had her scar. To prove she was right, Yui had given Gabimaru a quick kiss, making Gabimaru blush, and is the reason why Yui loves Gabimaru. In the present, Gabimaru begins crying that he is irredeemable, all whilst memories of Yui accepting him for who he is flashes through his mind. Gabimaru had wanted to quit his shinobi life and live alongside Yui peacefully, but Gabimaru knew his lineage along with the village chief would never allow such a life, making Gabimaru cry that he can never be normal. Luckily, Sajiri shows off an official pardon that will grant Gabimaru full immunity to all of his crimes along with full protection moving forward. Before Sajiri can grant such an offer to Gabimaru, she says Gabimaru must first visit Shinsenkyo, a place people consider paradise or heaven to retrieve something. In the past, travelers had reached Shinsenkyo by traveling southwest beyond the Ryukyu Kingdom, all baffled by the gorgeous and dreamlike scenery, just like the paradise they had envisioned. When the shoguns had heard that the elixir of life could be found on Shinsenkyo, they sent more parties to search for the item. But when the parties returned, strange flowers were seen growing from the men's corpses. Such a tale baffles Gabimaru, but Sajiri says that all sorts of criminals will be sent to the island to search for the elixir, and the one that is successful will be given a free life. To top things off, Sajiri says that the report shows that Yui has hopes that Gabimaru will return one day, having shut herself off from everyone, something that fires Gabimaru up. When the other executioners call out Sajiri for not executing Gabimaru, they all draw their spears ready to slay Gabimaru themselves. But with a single exhale, Gabimaru sets his body ablaze with his ninjutsu. In the blink of an eye, Gabimaru diffuses the situation by taking down the surrounding men, only to agree to help Sajiri track down the elixir of life. Sajiri says they'll first head to Edo, and with Gabimaru agreeing to take on whatever comes his way, he wishes for Yui to wait for the day he reunites with her. In the past, Sajiri's father, Kichiji Yamada as seaman, was once tasked with beheading a convicted storyteller, and with clean precision, Sajiri's father was able to lob off the storyteller's head. Strangely, even though their head was cut off, the storyteller continued to tell a story, a feat Sajiri wishes to replicate. As Sajiri grew up, she began practicing her executions, naturally garnering attention seeing as she was female, but sadly with every person she slain, Sajiri began to feel more guilty. Aizen Yamada as seaman had advised Sajiri to not fear her actions, but during her next execution, Sajiri had performed her duties as normal, but Aizen utters that the fear within her is causing Sajiri to give the convicted a painful death. Sajiri has since wondered how she can become more fearless, wondering if there is someone she could execute without feeling any emotions. But in the present day, we see various criminals gathered near the ocean. The announcer first introduces the 11th Taishigun, Tokugawa Nariyoshi, but hearing that name, the gathered criminals begin booing the man. Off to the side, Sajiri notices that Tanio Saikichi, a burglar amongst the crowd, along with Nikamaru the arsonist, Kido Shuken the murderer, plus various other deadly criminals. Silencing the criminals, the announcer says the person who successfully retrieves the elixir of life will be given a life pardon in the form of a certificate, a statement that catches everyone's attention. Sajiri suddenly spots Adachi Matagoro, a criminal that targets women and children for pleasure, someone that makes Sagiri wonder if she would feel guilty putting down. At the same time, we see Gabimaru bored out of his mind, but suddenly Yuzuraha, a fellow criminal, says it's a pleasure to meet Gabimaru, a little disappointed he isn't as big or scary looking as she expected. When the announcer tries telling everyone about what they can expect when heading to Shinsenkyo, the criminals all cry that they're bored, prompting Aoki to ask the criminals to take off their masks, revealing the corpse of their former sergeant who visited the paradise. Aoki says the body of their sergeant is no longer human, and when the sergeant returned there were lumps on their body that sprouted into flowers. Aoki reveals that 60 of their men had also gone missing on their most recent expedition, something that begins to freak out some of the criminals, but Nirugai speaks up, asking if there truly is an elixir of life to be found on the island. Aoki says the criminals are allowed to refuse the offer if they want, prompting a tattooed-looking man to leave the scene, but instantly Aizen takes his life. Aoki declares that each criminal will have a member of the Yamada Asiman clan monitoring them, and if the criminals act up, the Yamada members will be free to put them down. Aoki adds that the criminals won't be able to leave the island by boat if their monitors aren't with them. But to make things worse, Tokugawa orders for the criminals to decide who will board the boats and head to paradise, giving Chobei Aza the cue to eliminate one of his competitors. Seeing as neither Aoki nor any other shogun is against Chobei's actions, the criminals suddenly start a massive brawl, each slaying each other with underhand tactics, all whilst Gabimaru patiently observes everyone. Aoki is weirded out when he sees Tokugawa enjoying the bloodshed before him. And when Tokugawa asks for the criminals, he should be looking forward too. One of the shoguns starts off by pointing out how talented Chobei is, having established a bandit village in the mountains of Io at such a young age. Next is Yuzuriha, who is a kunoichi and was part of the invasion of Sajua Castle. As for Gantetsu Saitamiya, he is well known for his masterful swordplay. Finally is Rokuruta, the giant monster that seems to be unfazed by the surrounding violence. But when the shogun points out that Gabimaru is supposed to be the most deadly of them all, we see that Gabimaru has yet to slay anyone. Following Sajiri, she suddenly hears Aizen calling her out for being afraid, reminding Sajiri that her weaknesses will only handicap her when they arrive on the island. Aizen declares that Sajiri isn't fit to wield a sword, reminding Sajiri of her upbringing as members of the Yamada clan at a very young age are tasked with testing swords, beheading criminals, and making medicine from corpses. Sadly, Sajiri was always bullied by other kids, all mocking her for being the daughter of the so-called neck chopper cannibal Asa. Even though Sajiri tried suppressing her emotions, she was naturally drawn to the sword, strangely able to see disturbing reflections of the truth in the blade she wields. In the present, we see 3 criminals rally together to escape their entrapment, all declaring that they'll attack Sajiri and steal her blade. Before Aizen can intervene, Sajiri offers to put them down, stealing her resolve even though the souls of those she's slain still scare her. As Sajiri easily decapitates the 3 attacking criminals, she is suddenly surprised to hear Gabimaru confront Tokugawa, asking why they have to slay others to go on the expedition. Annoyed, Aoki asks a fellow criminal to slay Gabimaru in exchange for a guaranteed spot to the island. But as the criminal tosses a rock towards Gabimaru, Gabimaru easily dodges, only to ask the criminal if he feels bad for taking another's life. When the criminal says he could care less, Gabimaru gets serious, declaring he'll slay those who try to take his freedom. In an instant, Gabimaru begins dismantling the weaklings before him, taking one life after the other, even accidentally breaking free from their entrapment, only to continue his brawl in the nearby ocean. As the blood from the corpses stain Gabimaru and the ocean around him, the onlookers are disturbed by what they see, but Sajiri suddenly realizes what she was missing. Sajiri says she has been afraid to take the lives of others, when she should develop the resolve to shoulder the lives she has taken, just like what Gabimaru has been doing. As Sajiri sheds some tears, she announces that she will be the one to put Gabimaru down, and with that, Aoki announces the 10 participants that will be boarding the ships, starting with Chobi the Bandit King, Gantetsu the Sword Dragon, Kain the Hunter, Nurugai of Sanka, Horobu the Killing Prayer, Gabimaru the Hollow, Akajinu the Cannibal Courtesan, Yuzuriha of Keishu, Makaya Moro the Apostate, and Rokuroda the Giant. The next day, the criminals are given their Yamada monitor, only for everyone to board a ship heading straight for Shinsenkyo, Paradise Island. In the past, the chief of a Wagakure village showed off his immortality by allowing himself to be punctured and pierced by all sorts of weapons, saying that he had acquired his powers from a land across the ocean. As the gang arrive on the island, we see Gabimaru and Sajiri split off from the other members, both beginning their trek all whilst admiring the beautiful scenery around them. Gabimaru tells Sajiri to stay alert, especially since the surrounding plants and animals seem out of place. And as Gabimaru breaks free from his binds, Sajiri says she has been given strict instructions to have the criminals tie up their hands during their time on the island. Gabimaru says Sajiri is being too picky, plus their rations will only last them 3 days, but Sajiri draws her blade, reminding Gabimaru that she will execute him if he disobeys her. Seeing as he has no choice, he allows Sajiri to tie his hands up, but suddenly a massive steel ball clobbers Gabimaru. Revealed to be Kyun taking out his competition, everyone is surprised to see Gabimaru unfazed by Kyun's powerful blow, but Sajiri recognizes Kyun to be a warrior monk obsessed with wielding weapons. Rumor has it that Kyun has stolen 100 weapons from those he slaughtered, but Sajiri demands to know why Kyun's arms aren't tied, asking Kishu what he is doing. Kishu scolds Sajiri for being a stickler for rules, especially since the criminal's hand can be retied once they reboard the ships. And to make things worse, Kishu tries pointing out how lowly ranked Sajiri is, but Sajiri stops him before he can. Kyun is annoyed everyone is ignoring, choosing to unveil his toolbox filled with weapons, as he creepily announces that he'll test out his new weapons on Gabimaru. Gabimaru says the others will get a head start if they spend their time fighting, but Kyun could care less, especially since Kishu and Sajiri have allowed their duel. As Sajiri asks Gabimaru to tie up his hands, Kyun takes the chance to rush Gabimaru, but all of his weapons break upon colliding with Gabimaru. When Gabimaru finishes tying his own hands, he uses one of Kyun's poles to propel Kyun into the air, and seeing as Kyun's weapons have all been tossed into the air as well, Gabimaru locks onto one in particular. With a single kick, Gabimaru sends one of Kyun's own weapons directly into Kyun's stomach, all watching as Kyun collapses onto the ground. Sadly, Kyun is revealed to have sewn layers of protection into his own skin, surviving Gabimaru's attack, only to get pumped up for their brawl. Sadly, Gabimaru wipes the floor with Kyun, completely skewering the monster with his very own weapons. Seeing as his job is finished, Kishu chooses to decapitate Kyun and bring back his head as proof to leave the island. But before Kishu leaves, he warns Sajiri that she is quite unlucky. Kishu says the moment they arrived at the island, all the criminals had reverted to their twisted ways to survive, some trying to slay each other, whilst others attempted to befriend each other. Kishu reminds Sajiri that the criminals will do whatever they want to survive, confusing Sajiri since the criminals should follow the Shogun's rules if they want to be pardoned. But Kishu says surviving is all that matters when they're on this island. Kishu offers to set Sajiri free by putting Gabimaru down, but before Kishu can draw his blade, Gabimaru appears before him, declaring he doesn't want to waste time fighting a nobody. As Gabimaru and Sajiri prepare to leave, Kishu says he predicts things will change heavily in a few hours, and as we cut to Aizen, we see him busy tying up his boat. Seeing an opening, Rokuroda appears before Aizen, forcing Aizen to draw his blade, but upon seeing his sword shatter upon reaching Rokuroda's skin, Aizen is ultimately eliminated. Next up is Horobu, who is slain by Chobei. As for Akajinu, she is dispatched by Cheyenne, all whilst Yuzuriha and Mikaya have both been slain. Kishu tells Gabimaru that a messenger made contact with a new Iwagakure, and rumor has it that they'll be making their way to the paradise, alerting Gabimaru. As for Sajiri, Kishu says that this expedition is most likely a way to elect the next head of their clan. With that final warning, Kishu takes his leave, and with Sajiri wondering what type of person Gabimaru truly is, she is suddenly forced to block a strike from Gabimaru's blade. Gabimaru admits he was trying to put down Sajiri painlessly, flashing back to the moment when the village chief slaughtered Gabimaru's parents, having asked to leave his village after giving birth to Gabimaru. Gabimaru remembers the chief, instructing Gabimaru to brush aside emotions to avoid being weak. And as Sajiri demands to know why Gabimaru has turned on her, Gabimaru says he has to find the elixir before the Iwagakure clan arrive on the island. Gabimaru apologizes since he needs to take down Sajiri, seeing as she is burdening him. But strangely, Sajiri nor Gabimaru can muster up the courage to take the other's life, both wondering what is wrong with themselves. Flashing back, we see Yui asking Gabimaru to embrace his emotions, especially since courage comes from someone being honest with how they feel. But after meeting Yui, Gabimaru had noticed his emotions getting in the way of his hunting. As Sajiri continues to duel Gabimaru, he opts to use his hands to take on Sajiri, but his emotions prevent him from dealing the final blow. With each blow, we see Gabimaru pulling his punches, cursing himself for being so weak. Stealing his resolve, he manages to shatter Sajiri's blade, but when he attempts to cut her down, Sajiri manages to save herself by blocking with her sheath. Sajiri calls out Gabimaru for being pathetic, and seeing as he has no other choice, Gabimaru manages to mount Sajiri, readying himself to don his hollow form. With every ounce of hatred in his body, Gabimaru relies on his instincts to plunge his blade into Sajiri, completely entranced by the village chief's influence. But still he is unable to take Sajiri's life. Strangely, memories of Yui sway Gabimaru to drop his blade, but this makes Gabimaru tremble as he fears his emotions will prevent him from reuniting with Yui. Sajiri corrects Gabimaru, as she believes Gabimaru has become far more stronger now, especially since he is attempting to change. With Sajiri's words hitting home for Gabimaru, she manages to convince Gabimaru to sheath his blade, both calling a truce as Sajiri says she wants to see Gabimaru change for the better. Elsewhere, we follow Fuchi and Gantetsusai encountering some strange-looking statues, but when a butterfly lands and stings Gantetsusai's hands, Gantetsusai gets a strange feeling. Instantly severing his own hand, Gantetsusai points out the disturbing human face on the butterfly, and just as Gantetsusai predicted, his lobbed-off hand begins to sprout flowers. At that moment, the island begins to rumble as various creatures begin to flock around the intruders of their land, forcing everyone to stay on high alert as strange anomalies make themselves known. In the past, no one would mess with Gantet Sasai as he had honed his swordplay masterfully, even drawing the attention of Lord Tatsumi, who recruited Gantet Susai as one of his officers. Gantet Susai agreed, seeing as he was given a place to stay and food, but during an evening of drinks with Tatsumi, Tatsumi had questioned if Gantet Sasai was even capable of slaying a dragon. Pissed, Gantet Sasai had destroyed the dragon carving Tatsumi had owned, ultimately putting a bounty on Gantet Sasai as Tatsumi sent his men to arrest Gantet Sasai. Hearing that Gantet Sasai will return one day and mess with Tatsumi more, Fuchi is weirded out by Gantet Sasai's reason for living. Gantet Susai asks what the tools Fuchi had brought with him, but Fuchi brushes aside the question, declaring that he is ranked 9 amongst his peers. Fuchi says the tools he's brought are for dissection, swiftly drawing his blade, which alerts Gantet Sasai, all whilst ordering Gantet Sasai to not look down on him. Seeing Fuchi's resolve, Gantet Susai simply begins to head through the forest, making Fuchi ask what Gantet Susai has planned. Gantet Susai announces that he'll start off by eliminating his competition, something Fuchi had expected, especially since these expeditions are like creating insect poison, with the most poisonous insects surviving till the very end. Back in the present, we see Gabimaru and Sajiri prepare to face off against a fish-looking monster with prayer beads, both weirded out by the island's inhabitants. When the fish sends multiple arms after Gabimaru, Gabimaru is forced to evade, landing a lethal kick on the fish's head. Sadly, the monster manages to grab hold of Gabimaru, slamming him onto the ground. Sajiri tries backing Gabimaru up, but Gabimaru orders Sajiri to stay back, reminding her he is basically invincible. Seeing as the fish is unfazed by the hole in its head, Gabimaru remembers Rule 5 of the Shinobis, recognizing he shouldn't engage with unknown enemies. Distracted by Sajiri, Gabimaru is binded and tossed around once more, but before he can give Sajiri the order to flee with him, our duo realize they've been surrounded by smiling monsters in all directions. Sajiri can't help but feel lightheaded, checking to see what Gabimaru plans to do, but seeing as there is no way out, Gabimaru gets serious. Igniting himself with his flames, Gabimaru begins dismantling the monsters around him, crying out that he needs to survive no matter what. Entranced by the scenery around her, Sajiri barely manages to evade a monster that has snuck up on her. But having let her guard down, Sajiri is suddenly surrounded by smaller-looking creatures. Taking note of Sajiri's predicament, Gabimaru reasons he should just let Sajiri be slain, but his emotions refuse to allow such a thing, forcing Gabimaru's body to move and rescue Sajiri. Before Sajiri can thank Gabimaru, a tentacle from the fish monster attempts to strike Gabimaru from behind, but Genji appears, slaying the fish monster. Senta and Yuzuriha appear alongside Genji, all impressed. Gabimaru was able to hold off the smiling creatures, but as Gabimaru thanks them for saving him, he asks why Yuzuriha has 2 people monitoring her. Yuzuriha asks Gabimaru to not be so frightened, especially since she is a fellow ninja, and when Yuzuriha tries seducing Gabimaru, Gabimaru instantly avoids her seduction tactics. Yuzuriha says their team of 5 will give them a greater chance at survival, but Sajiri asks why Yuzuriha has 2 people with her. Genji introduces himself as a rank 8 seaman, revealing that his original criminal Mikaya was seduced and slain by Yuzuriha, so he reasoned he should help watch over her. Sajiri accuses Genji of being seduced by Yuzuriha, all while Senta introduces himself as the rank 5 amongst their cohort. Seeing as there may be greater monsters to slay, everyone agrees to team up, but when Yuzuriha tries getting all touchy with Gabimaru, he once again pushes her away. Hurt, Yuzuriha manages to trip and pull Gabimaru in close, reminding Gabimaru that only one of them can return with the elixir, therefore they should make the most of their time together. Gabimaru wonders why they should trust Yuzuriha moving forward, but Yuzuriha offers up the intel they've gathered, declaring that the bugs on the island are the most dangerous of them all. Apparently, the human-faced bugs can poison people whilst causing them to hallucinate, something Yuzuriha found out when she used Mikaya as a test subject. As for the centipedes and other creatures, they're basically harmless, another revelation thanks to Mikaya. To top things off, Yuzuriha had played dead to lure and slay Mikaya. Senna adds that most of the statues on the island are a mix of Buddhist and Taoist designs. Strange since both religions are quite different, and seeing as there's more information they'll need to gather, Yuzuriha promises to disclose anything she knows. Gabimaru demands to know why Yuzuriha is so desperate to cooperate with them. Hearing that Yuzuriha has a younger sister with an incurable disease, and in order to provide for her sister, Yuzuriha became a shinobi and joined a prestigious clan. Immediately, Gabimaru calls Yuzuriha out for fabricating her past. Something Yuzuriha admits is true, as she says she simply doesn't want to die young. Realizing how strange Yuzuriha is, Gabimaru demands to know what she did to Mikaya. But Yuzuriha refuses to disclose the experiments she performed on the poor soul. Gabimaru says he'll need to keep an eye on Yuzuriha. But as the gang discuss their next course of action, we see Sadri off to the side questioning how she can help the team. Feeling strange and lightheaded, Sadri suddenly collapses, only for us to cut to Toma, who is an outsider that was acknowledged by the Yamada clan for his exceptional swordplay. Aizen said Toma needed to execute someone to be an official member of their clan, ultimately allowing Toma to request that Chobei be the person he executed, revealing that Chobei is actually Toma's big brother. When Toma had told Chobei, he only needed to retrieve the elixir to be pardoned for life. Chobei immediately accepted, cutting to the present day, where Chobei is seen manically tearing through the statue like monsters. Toma highly respects his big brother, even praising him for staying strong when the lord they served in the Edo castle became corrupt. To make things worse, their mother had passed due to their poverty, and their father was executed alongside the corrupt lord. Luckily, Chobei was a smart boy, having one day been captured alongside Toma by some bandits. But instantly Chobei was able to charm his way into working with the bandits. Over time, Chobei was caught, but even still Chobei had sacrificed himself so Toma could live a good life and return to rescue him. Seeing the unlimited swarm of monsters approaching them, Chobei instructs Toma to flee with him. And as our brotherly duo duck and weave past the creatures, Toma ends up getting caught. Sadly, Chobei leaves Toma to fend for himself, something Toma doesn't fault Chobei for doing as he makes his final stand. But surprisingly, Chobei returns to help, having retrieved a bigger axe from a monster's corpse. As a soul projectile scrapes Chobei, the duo suddenly spot even more horrific monsters surrounding them, freaking Toma out when the monsters begin to speak. Chobei says he's had enough of the creatures rambling, choosing to go berserk as he enters into a frenzied state, only to carve up the monsters. Toma remembers that his big brother will always be a beacon of hope for him, both agreeing to slay everyone else and claim the elixir for themselves. But Toma wonders how they'll be able to fend off their other competitors. In her dreams, Sadri can only picture her father's disappointed face, but luckily, she awakens to see Genji watching over her. Genji says they've taken shelter in a cave and that Sadri shouldn't move since she is still recovering from the butterfly's poison. But she ignores Genji's advice, choosing to peep her head outside. Surprisingly, the other three are quite nonchalant, with Gabimaru making dinner, Sita mending the team's clothing, and Yuzuriha lazing around. Seeing as Sadri has awoken, Sita says they can continue their journey whilst they discuss their next course of action. And when Gabimaru shows off the food he had mashed together using the surrounding plants and seeds, Yuzuriha can't help but be disgusted. Regardless, Gabimaru says he had scouted the island whilst foraging, declaring that no location stood out to him. Yuzuriha asks if Gabimaru would be able to guess where the elixir is, but Gabimaru lies and says he only has the sketch of the elixir given to them to go on. Gabimaru adds that the plants are mainly combinations of ones found on the mainland, and seeing as they're near Ryukyu, there could be flowers that Gabimaru has never seen before. Strangely, Gabimaru reveals that some of the plants around them resembled the people that were previously sent to the island, a horrifying realization that makes Yuzuriha ask if Gabimaru fed them the corpses of their predecessors. Gabimaru says he didn't, but wonders if the mandarin plant he found could be the elixir. Sadly, Senta says the original idea of the elixir came from their interpretations, so their best bet would be to figure out what created the stone statues first. Sadri says she is still creeped out seeing as the wildlife is too dangerous for normal species to survive on the island. And strangely, there were no reproductive organs on the creatures they slayed, plus they resemble gods that were created using human and animal parts. As the group tries to wrap their heads around the phenomena they've been facing, Gabimaru declares that such immortal beings would indicate that the elixir is real, but first they must figure out where the monsters live. That evening, Sadri is still amazed an entire day has yet to pass, but suddenly Genji asks Sadri to leave the island, declaring that as a daughter of the Yamada clan, she should focus on giving birth to their future generation. Sajiri says she'll stay and fulfill her duty, but Genji calls out Sajiri for losing her sword granted to her by the clan, reminding Sajiri that she doesn't have the heart to put down Gabimaru if the time comes. Genji says Sajiri's skills as a sword tester and executioner will do her no good in battle, but Senta appears questioning if it'll be easy to return to their main boat, seeing as most don't make it out alive. Cutting over to the rank 10 Tenza, we see him and Nurugai attempt to escape the island and return to the main boat, but Nurugai says Tenza is dumb for using brute strength to fight the currents in the ocean. Nurugai says he won't be able to return to land safely, seeing as he doesn't have the elixir, but Tenza says he'll speak to the shoguns, intriguing Nurugai. When the duo spot the main boat in the distance, they jump in joy, but eerily they realize they've discovered the shipwrecks of all the previous boats that failed to escape the island. In the fog of war, a creepy silhouette is seen spying on them, and when Tenza draws his sword, the creature horrifically attacks with its tentacles. Managing to evade and leap onto the shipwrecks, Nurugai says that Tenza's shiny sword is showing the monster where they are, and seeing as they need to flee from the eldritch horror chasing after them. Both desperately search for a usable boat. Nurugai still remembers the moment when his grandpa had asked Nurugai to survive no matter what, and it's revealed that Nurugai was the one who tried helping some samurais that were lost in the forest. But when they discovered Nurugai's village in the mountains, they slaughtered them, all seeing as the village wouldn't submit to them. Nurugai was the only one taken alive, ultimately meeting Tenza, who believed an innocent child shouldn't be executed, hence he was offered the chance to go free if he finds the elixir. But Nurugai wondered if he should live on to preserve his bloodline or snuff himself out to atone for his sins. Horrifically, the duo run into a malformed-looking Kishu, making Tenza cry out, seeing as Kishu is unresponsive. Out of nowhere, the monster's tentacle tears Kishu's body into two, only for multiple other tentacles to entrap our duo in a ring. Seeing Kishu's corpse, Nurugai is reminded of his grandpa's last moments, suddenly falling onto his knees as he asks that Tenza leave him and flee. When a tentacle rushes towards Nurugai, Tenza severs the tentacle only to demand Nurugai explain himself. But Nurugai says the Sanka convention he grew up and instructed him to live for the mountain and village. With Tenza blocking another attack from the creatures, Tenza asks Nurugai to explain why he doesn't want to flee, but this annoys Nurugai as he sees Tenza is putting his body on the line to protect him. As the creatures begin to swarm our duo, Tenza continues to hold them off, demanding to know if Nurugai wants to live. Suddenly struck with the fond memories he had with his gramps, Nurugai cries that he wants to live, prompting Tenza to toss him a sword as they both fight their way toward a stray boat off in the distance. As the evening sun appears, we see that Nurugai and Tenza have successfully escaped their demise and made it back to the island, but they fear that all the surrounding currents only lead back to the island. Tenza does remember the lone samurai that made it back to the island, declaring they'll search for that route once they get cleaned off, but upon seeing Nurugai's girlish figure, Tenza realizes that Nurugai had been a girl all along. Nurugai says she's fallen for Tenza, but as we cut back to the others, Genji is seen storming off as he says Sajiri is expected to leave tomorrow morning. Alone with Senta, Senta says he half agrees with Genji as Sajiri seems to be the only one able to tame Gabimaru, something that makes Senta ask how the two got so close. Sajiri decides to hide Gabimaru's past from the others, cutting to later that night when everyone is asleep, but Sajiri chooses to have a chat with Gabimaru. Weirdly, Gabimaru asks if Sajiri is feeling better, catching Sajiri off guard as Gabimaru seems to care for her. Gabimaru says he'll face the Iwagakure if they invade the island, and once he leaves the island, he'll live the rest of his life with Yui, something Sajiri finds admirable. Sajiri asks how Gabimaru can be so strong, but Gabimaru says he can sense great potential in Sajiri herself. Unable to pinpoint exactly what it is, but Gabimaru's instincts tell him that Sajiri is strong. Seeing as Gabimaru believes in her, we cut to the next day, where Genji offers to escort Sajiri back to her boat, but Sajiri says she won't be leaving. Sajiri still remembers the prejudice she received from her peers and parents during her upbringing as a woman, especially since women were never meant to wield a blade nor have the right to lead their clan, but Genji can't understand what Sajiri is feeling. Sajiri cries that she wants to live as a samurai, swiftly bowing to Genji as she pleads for Genji to allow her to live her life how she sees fit, but Genji says he can't bear to listen to such nonsense. as Genji draws his blade to knock some sense into Sajiri. Sajiri swiftly disarms and steals Genji's blade, pissing him off as he refuses to be made fun of. But before things can escalate, Rokuruda appears, ripping a hole in Genji's stomach. In the past, we see that Rokuruda would always eat, eventually growing up and being unable to control his powers to a point where he slayed his own parents. In the present, Genji had pushed Sajiri away from Rokuruda's attack, tanking the entirety of the blow as he was flung brutally into a tree. Seeing as Genji is on the brink of death, Genji cries for Sajiri to run, but Rokuruda has snuck up on her preparing to attack. Right on cue, Gabimaru appears, knocking Rokuruda aside, horrifying Sajiri when she realizes Aizen was meant to be watching over the giant. Seeing as Rokuruda is clearly agitated and unharmed, Gabimaru declares he'll have to take the bout seriously. And seeing as Shinobi Rule 9 is accurately analyzing enemies' abilities, Gabimaru says he'll test to see what Rokuruda is capable of. In a mere second, Rokuruda rips a tree out from the ground, nonchalantly launching it towards Gabimaru. And as he evades, he cries for Sajiri to get to safety and leave Genji's body. Gabimaru is a little annoyed that Yuzuriha is watching idling by, something she is proud of as she begins cheering Gabimaru on, and seeing as Rokuruda has only brute strength, Gabimaru says he'll only have to focus on predicting Rokuruda's swings. Strangely, Rokuruda begins changing up the speed in which he attacks, forcing Gabimaru to stay on the defensive, as he realizes that Rokuruda is more capable than he seems. Testing out a theory, Gabimaru employs his stone-throwing technique, but the deadly projectiles simply bounce off Rokuruda's thick exterior. Seeing as Gabimaru's other ninjutsus are basically useless against such a formidable opponent, we cut to Sajiri, who desperately tries to stop Genji's bleeding, but Genji says it's too late. Genji takes the chance to point out how nurturing Sajiri is, but Sajiri cries she has always wanted to embody the responsibilities of both men and women, shocking Genji as he finally realizes what Sajiri was trying to tell him earlier. Genji chooses to give Sajiri his blade, an item that is meant to represent a warrior's soul, and seeing as Rokuruda probably slayed Aizen, Sajiri must be the one to take the giant down. Back with Gabimaru, he is unable to get close to use his flames on Rokuruda, fearing that he'll be snuffed out the moment he gets too close. But surprisingly, one of Rokuruda's fingers are severed, revealed to have been Sajiri who had targeted one of Rokuruda's joints. Seeing as Rokuruda does have weak points after all, both Sajiri and Gabimaru agree to work together, all while Senna says he would like to tend to Genji's wounds, but Yuzuriha calls Senna out for telling a bold-faced lie. Yuzuriha says they can flee if the others lose, and seeing as Rokuruda's finger wound has already stopped bleeding, Gabimaru says they'll cut Rokuruda at the legs to make him kneel only to take the giant down with a single blow to his neck. As Gabimaru draws Rokuruda's attention, he buys time for Sajiri to sneak over to Rokuruda's legs, but her slash fails to breach the giant's skin. Seeing as her attack was filled with emotion, Sajiri says she needs to rid herself of all emotions, all whilst Rokuruda retaliates with some projectiles of his own. Although our duo can evade, Gabimaru notes his fatigued legs. As for Sajiri, she still fails to make a cut on Rokuruda's body. Sajiri cries they need to make Rokuruda kneel over before she can cut his nape, but suddenly Rokuruda's stomach begins to growl, causing the giant to bawl his eyes out as his cries create deafening sound waves. With everyone in the vicinity covering their ears, Gabimaru is suddenly caught off guard as Rokuruda pounds him into the ground. And even though Gabimaru seems fine, he suddenly begins spewing out blood as the impact from the single attack was too much for him. Seeing as Gabimaru is unable to move, Sajiri rushes to intercept Rokuruda's next attack, and as she sees her life flash before her eyes, she comes to the realization that her attacks can both be filled with emotion and reason. Masterfully, Sajiri manages to parry Rokuruda's next attack, only to duck a second incoming slam. Taking a deep breath, Sajiri braces and calms her mind, emitting an aura that frightens Gabimaru all whilst impressing Yuzuriha, as Senta says her ranking was originally meant to be 12th. Senta admits that Sajiri was placed last due to her status as a woman, but after she has removed any hesitation, it's apparent that her skills surpass even most masters. As Sajiri brawls with Rokuruda head-on, Gabimaru is completely blown away by how Sajiri is moving, and when Rokuruda loses footing and falls on his back, Sajiri rushes to capitalize. Sadly, Rokuruda leaps away before Sajiri can slice his neck, but seeing as Gabimaru is back online, Gabimaru says they'll need to employ a high-risk tactic to take down the giant. Stepping up, Gabimaru sets his heart ablaze, only to begin infusing each of his attacks with his purgatory flames. Kicking various flaming rocks, swinging a fiery tree, and even blowing a breath of flame towards the giant, Gabimaru begins to set the surrounding area on fire. Having realized what Gabimaru was planning, Yuzuriha and Senate are seen fleeing the scene, all whilst Gabimaru's flames spread rapidly throughout the island. Yuzuriha had realized that the smoke from the flames would ultimately rise up and begin suffocating Rokuruda due to his tall stature, and seeing as they'll be able to outlast the giant by keeping low to the ground. Our duo watches as Rokuruda coughs and cries out in agony. Giving in, Rokuruda finally collapses to his knees, squirming and gasping for air, but this gives Sajiri the perfect chance to cut his neck. When Rokuruda tries attacking Sajiri, Gabimaru blocks and pins Rokuruda to the ground, allowing Sajiri to calm herself and perfectly decapitate the giant. As Rokuruda's life flashes before his eyes, we learn that Rokuruda was actually cursed by extreme hunger, something that led him to be alone his entire life. As a last act of sympathy, Sajiri graciously asks Rokuruda to sleep for eternity, but Gabimaru is more concerned about the vicious flames encasing them. Seeing as they must flee the scene, Gabimaru leads the way for Sajiri, and seeing as both Genji and Aizen have passed, Sajiri promises to live and carry on their legacies. Not even a few minutes later, our duo hide from the statue monsters that seem to be heading over to the fire they created, strange seeing as animals normally avoid danger at all costs. Gabimaru says they have no choice but to continue deeper to where the monsters just came from, and seeing as they need to find the elixir as soon as possible, both Gabimaru and Sajiri begin bolting in the same direction. Coincidentally, they meet up with Yuzuriha and Senta, who seem to be mindlessly staring off into the distance. And when Gabimaru and Sajiri join them, they all become speechless upon discovering a village on the island. Cutting over to Chobei, he is seen drinking the blood of the monsters he's slain, all whilst Toma explains the possibility of hermits and outcasts that may live on the island. Suddenly, Chobei detects some movement off in the distance, and when our brothers head over to inspect the sound of the noise, they're horrified to see two seductive-looking beings embracing each other. Taofar and Ju-Far glare at the brothers when they realize they're being watched, both suddenly speaking as they demand to know how humans have made it to their location. But before Tao can invite the brothers to join them, Ju declares they will eradicate the brothers. Back with Gabimaru, he says they need to figure out if the inhabitants of the village are their enemies, all whilst a mysterious figure listens in on their conversation. Immediately, Gabimaru turns to face the figure, prompting the figure to run off, but Gabimaru sprints after them. Pulling off their hood, Gabimaru lays eyes on a child, but out of nowhere a bonsai-looking monster attacks Gabimaru, buying the girl enough time to flee the scene. Gabimaru cries that the girl may be their only hope at learning more about the island, choosing to leap towards the tree monster, only to kick it towards the others as he continues after the girl. Sajiri chooses to run after Gabimaru, leaving Senta and Yuzuriha to deal with the tree creature. And seeing as it's her time to shine, Yuzuriha tosses away Senta's glasses, only to gulp down a liquid that makes her pores ooze out a strange substance. With Gabimaru hot on the girl's tracks, he manages to catch up to her, noting how familiar she is when navigating the island. When the girl tries striking Gabimaru, he nonchalantly catches her hand, but surprisingly, she manages to flip and restrain Gabimaru, something extraordinary for her size. Sajiri tries calling out to the girl, reassuring her that they mean no harm, and when the girl stops to face Sajiri, she is revealed to have charged up a punch. As the little girl swings her mighty fist, Gabimaru swiftly intercepts the blow, but he still receives the impact from the punch, an abnormal occurrence similar to the strength Rokuruda exhibited. Having barely been able to keep conscious, Gabimaru is pissed that the little girl is giving them so much trouble, choosing to retrieve some vines only to bind and string the girl up. Funnily enough, Gabimaru's cold glare causes the girl to cry, allowing Sajiri to step in and nurture her. As Yuzuriha comes to fetch her duo, she reports that she was able to take down the tree monster, and as the gang waits for the girl to warm up to them, Huko the tree monster suddenly asks for Mei to be returned to them. Huko promises to take them to their village and feed them, and seeing as their village has a bath, our gang gladly follow Huko back to its village. Although skeptical, Gabimaru says this may lead to more information on the elixir, and upon reaching the abandoned, mist-looking village, Huko says they'll show off their home to the gang. Strangely, Huko says their village was very different 1,000 years ago, shocking the gang to see such antique-looking items in Huko's home. As Mei wakes up, Yuzuriha demands to take a bath first, completely melting away her sorrows as she indulges in a hot, steamy bath. Gabimaru is annoyed they're taking a break, but Sajiri seems to have been swayed by the hot bath as well, gladly joining Yuzuriha as she feels guilty for taking a break while still on the job. As Mei hands a girl some towels, we cut over to Senta, who yearns to take a sip of water, but Gabimaru says they need to be careful. When Huko presents an assortment of plump fruits, Senta can't help but drool, but although Gabimaru is hesitant, Huko says they aren't poisoned. Gabimaru asks how Huko knows Mei, but Huko refuses to answer, and before Gabimaru can ask about the location of Elixir, the entire gang sits down to enjoy a meal like a family. Huko starts by revealing that the land they're on is called Kotaku, and it's a location that Huko has lived on all their lives. Gabimaru asks if the elixir truly exists, something Huko confirms as it is commonly known as tan on the island, but Gabimaru demands to know where they can find it. Huko starts by explaining that the island is comprised of 3 regions, an outer region comprised of shore and woods known as Aishu, the middle section where the current village is located called Hojo, and finally the inner section filled with mist called Horai, and is also where they'll be able to locate the elixir. Gabimaru gets quite excited seeing as he'll get to reunite with Yui, but he is still skeptical, asking Huko if he can provide any proof. Huko says the immortal Tensins are beings that can never perish or age, and they're the primary proof that the elixir exists. And as we follow the brothers, they're seen helplessly fighting off against Ju, one of the Tensin. Huko says the monsters they fought prior are known as Sashins, whereas the Tensin are completely on another level, a disturbing fact since the Tensin won't allow any humans to leave the island. With Ju slaughtering Chobe and Toma, we see Gabimaru demand to know more about the Tensin. But Huko says they're beings that can command the Sashin and punish the guilty, and by turning the corpses of the people they slay into flowers, the Tensin can create more elixir. With Toma and Chobe being tossed into a pit filled with deformed humans, he desperately tries to free Chobe from being wrapped up in roots, all whilst Huko shows off the regenerative blessing he received from the elixir. When Gabimaru tries interrogating Mei, Sajiri and Yuzuriha scold him for doing something so inhumane, cutting to later that day, where Gabimaru is heading to take a bath. Gabimaru is weirded out seeing as Sajiri still needs to monitor him, but the duo are still unable to wrap their heads around the concept of the immortal Tensins, especially since Senna had pointed out that most of the concepts on the island are foreign Taoist terms. Regardless, Gabimaru says he needs to clean off first, but upon entering the bathhouse, they realize Mei is already inside. Gabimaru could care less seeing as people of all ages and genders would bathe together in his village. But when Sajiri inspects Mei's body, she is saddened to see both Gabimaru and Mei's bodies in rough shape. Taking charge, Sajiri says Gabimaru will need to scrub his body first, only to turn to Mei, suddenly applying a mix of oil and ash to help clean out her hair. Although Gabimaru doesn't like the idea of taking breaks, he still remembers a time when Yui would help him wash his back, all whilst telling Gabimaru to relax when he can, that way he'll be ready when he needs to fight. Gabimaru also remembers how his wife would conceal her face scar with her hair, something he had asked Yui to stop doing, especially since such trivial things don't bother him, and such a declaration meant a lot to Yui. In the present, Gabimaru asks Mei to be proud of the scar she's received as well, something that ultimately makes Mei warm up to Gabimaru, as he actually doesn't seem that scary of a man. Following a younger-looking Tenza, he was born into poverty and always considered trash by those who walked past him on the streets. Tenza had to steal in order to live, seeing as his parents didn't care for him, and one day whilst walking down the street, he had bumped into some samurais. When the samurais had tried teaching Tenza a lesson, Tenza ended up brutally beating them up, but on that fateful day, Tenza met Shine. In the present, Tenza and Nurugai are seen circling the island coast in hopes for a way out, but Nurugai says such a plan will only tire them out. Tenza says they can't fight the monsters in the forest, seeing as Nurugai is a girl. But as Nurugai cries that she wants to marry Tenza no matter what, they suddenly spot Zhu Jin appear beside them. Tenza wonders where Zhu came from, but Zhu strangely transforms from a female to male, all whilst angrily demanding to know who slayed the Shashins in the forest. Before our duo can flee, Zhu blinks in front of Tenza, successfully blowing Tenza back with an empowered fist. Nurugai tries running over to Tenza, but Zhu cuts her off, attempting to snuff her out as well, but Nurugai evades with several flips. Zhu is impressed by Nurugai's movements, but as Zhu calmly marches over to our duo, Tenza takes a chance to blind Zhu with a slash to their face. Horrifically, Zhu regenerates their wounds, making Tenza suggest they flee. Tenza starts off by dashing towards Zhu, instantly carving and slashing at Zhu's limbs, something that buys him enough time to flee with Nurugai into the forest. Sadly, Zhu manages to catch up to them all while showing off their half-plant and human body, and before Zhu can pay them back, a lone sword flies through the air, decapitating Zhu. Cheyenne appears, ordering our duo to run, and when Nurugai asks who Cheyenne is, Tenza reveals that Cheyenne is his master, and interestingly enough, Cheyenne is blind and navigates using his other senses. Having made it a safe distance away, Tenza introduces Cheyenne as a rank 4 swordsman amongst their peers, but before Tenza can say any more, Cheyenne scolds Tenza for not going for Zhu's head and legs. Cheyenne is glad to see Tenza is safe, revealing that when he tried leaving the island, Cheyenne couldn't find any safe currents that would get him away from the island. Cheyenne admits that there was a single current he found that led to safety, but a strange presence seemed to be guarding it, exciting Tenza as the three of them could possibly leave if they worked together. First things first, Cheyenne raises his blade to Nurugai, demanding to know why Tenza is working together with a criminal, especially since Cheyenne had executed his own criminal when she disobeyed orders and tried seducing him. Cheyenne reminds Tenza that they can't pick and choose who are deemed criminals, as it's ultimately their clan that decides, and they as executioners must follow the rules regardless of their beliefs. Tenza cries that Cheyenne is a hypocrite as he took Tenza in and trained him even though he was a criminal as well, and when Tenza cries that he wants to give Nurugai the same chance Cheyenne gave to him, Cheyenne can't help but praise how much Tenza has grown. Cheyenne agrees to allow Nurugai to tag along, surprising everyone when Cheyenne says he knows Nurugai is a girl. But before the gang can discuss what they'll do to avoid encounters with Zhu, Zhu mysteriously appears behind Tenza. Cheyenne swiftly tackles Tenza and Nurugai away, revealed to have received an almost lethal blow from Zhu. But as Tenza tries cutting off Zhu's limb once more, Zhu declares they've already adapted to Tenza's techniques, all whilst evading his slashes. Zhu says the humans will be needed to make more tan, freaking out Tenza as he declares he'll need to slay the monster before him now, taking a breath only to unveil his ultimate technique. Although Cheyenne tries calling for Tenza to stop, Tenza chooses to rush forth, sending out a flurry of slashes towards the monster. Sadly, Zhu easily evades each slash, retaliating with a single flick that punctures several holes into Tenza's body. In the past, Tenza had asked Cheyenne why he took him in and trained him, hearing Cheyenne utter that their job is to take lives, so it's natural that he wanted to help people in his spare time. Tenza found it hard to learn the way of the sword and adopt the practices of normal samurai, something Cheyenne didn't expect Tenza to accept anyway. But Cheyenne says Tenza has great potential and he needs to be ready to protect those he cares about in the future. Stiffening up, Tenza cries that he doesn't want such responsibilities put on him, declaring that he wants to leave and live out a normal life. Understanding Tenza's pleas, Cheyenne says if Tenza can land a blow on him anytime in the future, Tenza is allowed to leave as he pleases. The next morning, Tenza is seen attempting to sneak away from the dojo, but is caught by Aizen, who asks Tenza to accompany him for a morning walk. Aizen could care less if Tenza leaves or not, but as they stroll through a graveyard, Aizen shows off the grave of Cheyenne's former student. Aizen says the student's name was Tez Shin, a rebel just like Tenza, and sadly at the time Tez Shin wasn't given enough attention, so he left the dojo. Although things were calm for a time, Cheyenne was one day tasked with an execution, but when he prepared to execute the criminal he was assigned, Cheyenne had realized it was Tez Shin, his student. Aizen says Cheyenne was forced to follow through and put down his student, a sad end to Teshin's life as Tez Shin had returned to being a criminal when he left the dojo, and Tenza is meant to be Cheyenne's attempt at righting his wrongs. Later that day, Cheyenne was surprised to hear that Tenza wanted to spar him, both spending the rest of the day dueling each other as Tenza eventually grew quite close to Cheyenne. In the present, Tenza collapses to his knees, barely able to feel his fingers as the pain from his chest is making his vision go blurry. Tenza realizes that they'll all be slain if he falls, so as Tenza steals his resolve, he pushes himself forward to buy the others time. Punch after punch, Tenza manages to mount and pummel Zhu into the ground. But with a demonic-looking grin, Zhu blows another hole into Tenza's stomach. Seeing as Cheyenne is ready to avenge him, Tenza desperately cries for Cheyenne and Nurugai to flee. And when Cheyenne finally understands what he must do, Cheyenne chooses to run away with Nurugai, all whilst Tenza continues to stall Zhu. Completely defeated, Tenza wonders how great his life could have been if he got the chance to raise students of his own. But with Cheyenne and Nurugai escaping the scene, Nurugai demands to know what Cheyenne left a student. Cheyenne cries that he'll make Zhu pay for what they've done, all whilst Tenza is seen sleeping in a pool of his own blood. And as Tenza's final memories flash through his head, we learn that Tenza was ultimately able to disarm and land a strike on Cheyenne in the past. But Tenza had chosen to stay and train with Cheyenne instead of leaving the dojo. Back in the village, we see Cinta stressed out, even after reading all the books they found left behind. That night, whilst the girls sleep, we see Gabimaru and Cinta on lookout duty. But when Cinta falls asleep, Gabimaru gets impatient, choosing to head towards the center of the island alone. Dashing through some thick fog, Gabimaru continues south, but suddenly stops when he enters into a clearing filled with strange voices. Gabimaru realizes that there are tree creatures praying before him, and weirdly, they aren't moving, reminding Gabimaru that Senna had warned the gang against exploring further until they figure out more about the island. Gabimaru fears he is running out of time, continuing deeper into the fog, all while someone seems to be tailing him. Not too long after, Gabimaru runs into a man-made building. Something Huko had predicted as the center of the island is still meant to be quite preserved for those living in it. As Gabimaru reaches out to the door in front of him, he suddenly realizes that Zhu has appeared behind him, but luckily Zhu says they're too exhausted to engage in another fight. When Gabimaru asks if humans can truly be made into the elixir, Zhu sparks up, immediately rushing Gabimaru with an empowered palm. Gabimaru chooses to parry the blow, following up with a powerful kick that sends Zhu's head spiraling. But Zhu simply continues to hunt Gabimaru down. Seeing as Zhu can regenerate infinitely, Gabimaru employs his flames to incinerate Zhu. But before Gabimaru can turn away, Zhu sneaks up on Gabimaru even with their burnt body. Zhu manages to combo and slam Gabimaru into the walls of the building before them. And when Zhu regenerates all of their wounds, they're surprised to see Gabimaru still standing. As their duel continues throughout the desolate wastelands, Gabimaru is able to keep up with Zhu, something that excites Zhu as it's been ages since a human was comparable to them. With Zhu refusing to answer any of Gabimaru's questions, Gabimaru begins to grow tired, desperately racking his brain for a solution to outwit the being before him. Whilst attacking Zhu, Gabimaru strangely mimics Zhu's technique from earlier, managing to empower a kick that does a decent amount of damage to Zhu. Zhu realizes that Gabimaru himself doesn't know what he is capable of, and seeing as he can't let Gabimaru get the better of them, Zhu unveils a hidden technique, suddenly striking Gabimaru with an invisible projectile. The sheer impact of the projectile sends Gabimaru to his knees, and when Zhu begins firing hundreds of similar strikes at Gabimaru, Gabimaru cries that such a power is similar to Maze. Gabimaru desperately tries to leave the blast zone, but Zhu manages to clobber Gabimaru with a lethal blow, a strike that blurs Gabimaru's vision. Envisioning Yui cheering for him, Gabimaru musters all his strength and begins rushing towards the eye of the storm, only to begin exchanging blows with Zhu. Gabimaru declares he'll destroy Zhu faster than they can recover, successfully knocking Zhu down only to demand to know where the elixir is. Creepily, Zhu smirks, beginning to call forth several flowers to begin encasing their body. In mere moments, Zhu has morphed into a disturbing amalgamation of flower and monster, swiftly letting out a surge of electricity that ruptures the surrounding area. With a roar, Zhu clears the dust cloud formed from the explosion, but Gabimaru is still standing. When Gabimaru tries leaping in for a kick, Zhu simply blocks only to electrocute Gabimaru once more, sending Gabimaru clinging to whatever remaining life he has left. Gabimaru tries activating his flames to deal with Zhu, but his body screams out in agony, allowing Zhu to bombard Gabimaru with strikes all whilst he begins to lose consciousness. Waking up, Gabimaru notices Yui beside him, glad to see that everything was a dream. When Yui tries serving Gabimaru some tea, he apologizes to Yui, declaring that he may not be able to make it home after all. In the present, Zhu has restrained Gabimaru and is preparing to tear him apart, but surprisingly Gabimaru is still able to cut Zhu up. Remembering Rule 20, Gabamaru declares he'll muster up all of his strength and take down Zhu before he kicks the bucket, reflexively setting his heart ablaze as he attempts to burn Zhu up. Sadly, Zhu simply drops Gabamaru, allowing his flames to die out, only to charge up another electric shock to end Gabamaru. Right on cue, Mei appears, choosing to protect Gabamaru by erecting a barrier only to flee the scene, having leapt off the nearby cliff. Choosing not to pursue them, Zhu is clearly annoyed that Mei rescued a human. But as the sun begins to rise the next day, we see Sajiri disappointed that Cinta had let Gabamaru flee. Cinta deeply apologizes, suggesting they go search for Gabamaru. But Yuzuriha says it would be foolish, as it'll be quite hard navigating the thick fog in Horai. Luckily, Huko offers to join them, uttering that Mei may have gone after Gabamaru. Setting out straight away, Huko leads the way, all whilst Yuzuriha asks Huko to disclose more on these mysterious Tensen, especially since they may run into them soon. Huko says that the Tensen are 7 hermits, beings that are capable of changing their genders as they see fit. And as we cut to the Tensens, they're seen chatting away the day, only for Rain to appear, asking everyone to make their reports. The Tensens all report that peculiar humans have arrived on their island, and when they hear that many Sashians have been slain, Zhu blames Zhu for not keeping a closer watch on the humans. Zhu states that Zhu is very incompetent, suddenly blowing their head off as they hear Zhu was using too much Tao and even had to undergo their Kishikai transformation to survive. Rain orders everyone to settle down and not harm each other, seeing as their family. And when Rain asks if Zhu had dealt with the brothers properly, Zhu confirms that the brothers were dumped into the pit whilst barely alive. Rain tells the others not to underestimate this batch of humans, asking if Zhu had dealt with Gabamaru, but Zhu lies and says they did. To end their gathering, Rain pours each of the 7 members a cup of a strange liquid, and upon downing the drink, Zhu's wounds are all healed. Back with the gang, Huko says that there was originally a single hermit that became a god and split their being into several parts, and it is those 7 beings that govern the island. The gang are even more surprised to hear that Huko used to be human as well, but sadly the humans, after some time, transform into tree creatures, hence the praying tree statues in the clearing Gabamaru encountered. Huko says his family had all transformed before him, and tragically his daughter was the first to transform. So all Huko can do now is hope that him and his family souls are allowed into Horai, as it's ultimately the Tensen gods that decide whose soul can truly rest in the center of the island. Cutting over to Gabamaru, we see that he has managed to survive the fall thanks to Mei, but Gabamaru gets pumped seeing as Zhu seemed to be someone he could slay. Before Gabamaru can think of what to do next, Fuchi and Gantetsusai appear, intriguing Gantetsusai as he wants to slay Gabamaru. As Gantetsusai begins to assess Gabamaru's condition, he is impressed that Gabamaru is still breathing, declaring it won't be easy to defeat Gabamaru. Firing back, Gabamaru notices that one of Gantetsusai's arms is missing, declaring that he'll use that weakness to take down Gantetsusai with him. Before the boys can take each other's lives, Fuchi interjects, telling Gantetsusai that they need to extract information from Gabamaru, especially where Sajiri is along with the little girl behind Gabamaru. Gabamaru realizes it'll be a 2-on-1, but remembering that he needs allies to take on Zhu, Gabamaru swallows his pride and begs his enemies to assist him. Intrigued, Gantetsusai draws his blade ready to sever Gabamaru's neck, but Gantetsusai stops himself upon seeing Gabamaru not move. Seeing as the duo are willing to listen, Gabamaru reveals the existence of the Tensen to the others, information that is quite hard to believe. Surprisingly, Gantetsusai is on board with teaming up, declaring that he wants to become immortal, that way his name will become a pillar for generations to come. With Fuchi interested to study the bodies of the immortal Tensen, the trio agree to unite their strengths, but at that moment Mei awakens. Strangely, Gabamaru sees that Mei has grown substantially since they last spoke, swiftly rushing to ask Mei various questions. Seeing as he is scaring Mei, Gabamaru backs off only to thank her for saving him. And now that he's calmed down, Gabamaru asks what connections Mei has to the Tensen. Back with the others, Sitha can't help but be suspicious of the names of the Tensen along with the names given to the 3 territories, pointing out how the names are a mix of different religions. Sitha says the various relics and religious pieces they saw on the island are too jumbled, reminding them of Micaiah, who tried creating his own religion in an attempt to overthrow the existing shoguns. Plus, the monsters are strangely created, a sign that there is a creator overseeing things. and it seems that only the humans that have become flowers can leave the island. Senna suspects that their search for the elixir will also give them a way out of the island. But Yuzuriha doubts that they'll be able to find the elixir and upheave a system that has been in place for 1,000 years. Yuzuriha also fears that Gabimaru is no longer with them. But knowing his personality, Sadri says Gabimaru is 100% alive. Back with Gabimaru, he asks if Mei can help give them information on how to defeat the Tenzin. But when Mei utters that Tao can help them, she is incapable of explaining what Tao is. Gantet Sisai suspects that Tao is a form of martial arts. And as we follow the others, Huko explains that Tao is power that flows through all living things, and the Tenzin are masters of Tao. Following Nurugai, we see her attempt to land a blow on Cheyenne from behind, but mystically Cheyenne blocks and disarms Nurugai. Cheyenne refuses to take Nurugai as a student, seeing as all of his students have passed, but Nurugai cries that she can't bear to see her loved ones perish, something that resonates with Cheyenne. Cheyenne starts off by revealing the existence of waves flowing around their bodies, a feature Cheyenne uses to help him navigate the world. Cheyenne's explanation of waves is actually the same explanation for Tao. And to use Tao, a person must balance their state of mind, just like yin and yang. Huko says that Tao can grant a user immense strength and increase one's durability, something Sadri has noticed before. But as we follow Cheyenne, we see he has had a change of heart. As Cheyenne begins teaching Nurugai the basics of how to wield a sword, Nurugai suddenly notices several Sashins sneaking up on Cheyenne, but before Nurugai can say anything, Cheyenne begins slaying them all whilst continuing to teach Nurugai how to use a sword. Cheyenne reminds Nurugai that she'll have to keep up with him, something that fires her up as she brandishes her blade alongside Cheyenne, all while several Sashins surround Gabimaru and his group. Gabimaru is annoyed they don't have more time to chat, but Gantet Susai takes the lead by cutting down a few of the Sashins with his blade, declaring that they'll learn how to use Tao whilst they face the swarm ahead of them. With Gantet Susai giving Mei a ride on his shoulders, Gabimaru suddenly detects a strange presence past the swarm, wondering who is hiding in the far back. Elsewhere, we see Tao and Mu embracing each other, all whilst Tao praises Mu for creating the pit that can harvest more elixir for them. Mu proudly declares that people thrown into the pit will eventually become flowers, but the people need to be alive, but weakened so they can't escape, plus the existing corpses will help restrain anyone from leaving. Surprisingly, we see Chobei dragging his body out of the pit whilst Toma clings to his back, both managing to escape the pit alive. Toma had suggested they flee the island, but Chobei says they won't leave until they take down Ju and Tao, especially since he has figured out one of the Tenzin's weaknesses. Chobei says when he split Ju in half, it was Ju's lower half that regenerated, not the top half. And seeing as the Tenzin resemble plants, Chobei suspects that the Tenzin's roots or lower half is the source of their power. Toma is once again amazed by how observant his brother is, getting disgusted when Chobei retrieves a human arm from the pit to feast on, but suddenly a tentacle-looking dosher appears, casually greeting the brothers. As the boys leap back, they hear that the dosher is simply here to investigate as per the Tenzin's orders, and it seems that the centipede dosher is currently monitoring Gabimaru and his party. Dosher says that unlike the Sashins that lack intelligence, they're doshers, beings that act as right-hand assistants to the Tenzin. Dosher asks the brothers to simply submit themselves, but this pisses Chobei off as he propels towards Dosher with a kick, but Dosher dodges only to land a flush punch on Chobei. Chobei retaliates by ripping out Dosher's lead arm, impressing Dosher as he wonders if Chobei is using Tao, and seeing as the brothers aren't backing down, Dosher regenerates his arm only to call for Sashins to attack them. Chobei asks Toma to take out the weaklings, an order Toma gladly fulfills as he cuts down the small fries, leaving Chobei to brawl with Dosher. Dosher says the Tao flowing through Chobei's body would indicate that he is tired, combined with his regenerative abilities. Dosher says they'll wipe the floor with Chobei. Waiting for the right time, Dosher uses Chobei's irregular Tao flow to attack Chobei's blind spot, an attack that instantly drops Chobei.